have all been deprecated. In this demonstration, we want to take a look at the net user command. And I want to preface this with a couple of comments. First of all, the net commands have almost all been deprecated. Net use and net user are two of the few that are left to us out of a slew. I mean, I can't tell you how many times in my career the net time command came in handy. Or anyway, there's a slew of these net commands that have all been deprecated, and this one is on its way out too. If it weren't for the fact that they still test on it on the A+ certification exam, I would tell you to not waste any time on it at all and instead learn some PowerShell with the new AD user commandlet. That's where you ought to be spending your time, in my opinion. But this is on the A+ test, so we're looking at it here as part of the A+ certification prep. Now, if I just do a net user whack question mark, I get the syntax of the command, the basic switches that are available with it. And I can see right away that its function is to create and delete user accounts, right? That's what it's for. It's the command line interface for managing, defining, creating, and deleting local user accounts, primarily local user accounts. Now, I say that because you'll note that there is a domain switch. And so if I specify the domain switch, I'm saying, no, don't create it in the local SAM file database. Create it out on the network at a domain controller in the Active Directory database. Dig it? And so there's always that, whenever we're talking about user accounts, we want to make sure that we understand, are we talking about a user account that is restricted to the local machine, or does it live in a central repository like an Active Directory database, and I can use that account anywhere on the network? And this command line can be used for either of those, but again, not where you want to spend your energy. It's really not, guys. You want to be learning PowerShell today. PowerShell will keep you employed in the 21st century. The net use command and net user commands are likely to be gone in the near term. Now, right off the bat, when I say I can use this to create a domain account, well, I've got to have administrative rights in the domain to do that, right? I might be an administrator on the local machine, but if I'm not an Active Directory administrator with a user account management right, then that's going to fail for me. And so who can use this command? And whether or not the switches that you invoke will work for you is absolutely a function of who you are. Now, if I look up here, I can see that it says username and password. Okay, well, that, absolutely makes sense. I'm creating a new user. The user's going to have a password. And so I'm going to have to input a username and a password for that user object. But then there's this options. And this is all that there is of the help. So how do I get some more help to tell me what those options are? Well, if we do a net help user, and this works too with other of these net commands. Now look at all the action here, right? Now I've got all of the kinds of object properties that I would expect I'd be able to specify in a command line creation, the user object. Is the account, here they use the old language, is it active? Today we would say enabled, disabled. Do I have today we would say description, they used to call it a comment on the account. Country code. Does the account expire? A great setting when you're hiring temp employees. You're hiring contractors. They might have administrative rights on your network. I can't tell you how many places I've done consulting in. and I go back 6 months, a year, in one case, 12 years later, I walk back in the place. My account is still on the network, still active, and in point of fact, was still using the same password. And I could have logged into that thing anytime I wanted and been a full admin on that network over 12 years. Or the account could have been exploited against them by somebody else. So for those accounts, you want to set an expiration date. Make sure they get disabled. All right, then you got the full name, the home directory where they're, is particularly if you've got roaming user profiles, right, the path to the user's home directory. Can the user change their password? And specifies whether a user account must have a password. What? You gotta be kidding me. How long has... Okay, so that gives you an idea of just how out of date this thing is. Right? And if you didn't have to understand this for the A+ test, you would never waste a second of your life looking at it. But they're still testing on it. So you want to know what it is, you want to know what it does, and more importantly, you want to know that you're not going to ever count on this in your job. Not unless you're working for somebody that's still running XP. And if you're working for somebody that's still running XP, you ought to get your resume ready, in my opinion. This is a look at the net user command. In this demonstration, we want to take a look at the services MSC. And so if I go to the Start menu in the lower left-hand corner, launch the Start menu and type Services MSC, I can see the Services desktop app displayed there in the list. I can launch that, and it opens up. And this is a simple interface. When I look over at the left-hand navigation pane, there's just Services there. There's nowhere else to go. And then over here in the right are all the services running on this machine. And when I look at these services, I can see that at the very top here, there's the service name. There's a description of that service, why I'm interested in that service, its current status, and then the startup type, whether that startup type is manual, automatic, if the service is disabled, etc. And then finally here, the last column is the log on as. And now here's the gig with this. All of these services, when they launch and they interact with the operating system, have to run under some set of credentials, right? Those credentials give them access to the restricted, the privileged, the protected, the kernel mode components of the operating system so that they can interact with that operating system. And each of these accounts, the local system, the local service account, the network service account, they have sets of rights that let them perform the job, right? And there's an important distinction to make there. Rights define the way that a user or a service interacts with the operating system, as opposed to a permission set, which gives me a subset of permissions over objects in the directory. And the two words are commonly interchanged, right? People say rights when they mean permissions. They say permissions when they mean rights. And I don't want to make this a discussion of the semantics of that, but it's worth pointing out that there is a distinction. Rights define the ways in which I can interact with the operating system. right? Can I shut the operating system down? That's a right. As opposed to, can I read this file or execute this application, which is a permission, right? The read and execute permissions, to be precise. And so I do think that it's important to make that distinction. Now, one of the things that this machine does for me here on the network is it acts as a DNS server. And if I launch the DNS service properties just by finding it in the list and double-clicking it, I can see in here what the official service name is, right? Because there's a distinction between the display name and the service name. And if I were calling this service in a script, I would want to refer to the service name commonly. And then there's the description of the service, where the executable that's associated with this service lives. So if I'm having trouble with the service, maybe I take a look, are the files in that folder corrupt? Has some invasive application corrupted the files in that folder? What is its startup type? And do I want to change that startup type? And I can set it to automatic, delayed start, automatic. It automatically starts. Manual, I have to go in here and turn it on. Or it's disabled. It should not start under normal circumstances. Delayed start is handy if this service depends on another service to start first. And we can see that on the Dependencies tab. If I go over here and I look at Dependencies, I can see that this service depends on the following system components. Now, right off the bat, if I'm experiencing trouble with the DNS service, well, one of the questions that I want to ask is, am I really having a problem with this service? Or is one of the services that it depends on not starting? If I first notice the problem is with DNS, but then I look at dependencies and I see, okay, well, this is dependent on this and this and this. And then I go and I see that Active Directory domain services have not started. Maybe the problem is not with DNS. Maybe the problem is with an underlying service. And so I can get the dependencies list there. On the Recovery tab, we can specify what do we do in the event that this service fails. And I can restart it there, or tell it how to restart, where to restart, or run another program. And on the Login tab, I see the service that this, or the local account rather, that this service uses as its credentials. And it gets the associated rights with the local system account so it can do all the things that it needs to do. In the Windows world today, it's worth mentioning, I think, that a lot of the times what we do is we create a service account. And a service account is a particular type of Active Directory object that's designed just for services. And then finally, returning to the General tab here, you can see I could stop the service, pause the service. If you've stopped it, you need to restart it. If you pause it, you need to resume it. Right? These two go together and these two go together. And that's a quick look at the services MSC and how I can use it to start, stop, restart, and pause services, as well as determine service file locations and service dependencies. In this demonstration, we want to take a look at some of the graphical tools for systems management that you might not think of necessarily as tools for systems management. And I'll start with Notepad. And this is so important to me. Notepad is such a part of my daily existence that I have it pinned to the start, or to the taskbar here. I have it pinned to the start menu too, but it's right here on the taskbar. It's always available to me. And you may ask yourself, well, why? And the reason for that is because this is a simple text editor that supports no formatting options, really. And you know the kind of thing I'm talking about. If you've ever copied a web page or data off a web page and you try to paste it into Word, and you get funny symbols and you get @ signs and you get other garbage in there that you don't want. Well, that's because something happened in the formatting translation. So I can take anything from anywhere, pretty much, drop it in here, text, that is, right? Text. Drop it in here, and all the formatting is stripped away. Further, if I'm in PowerShell, let's say, and I'm doing something new in PowerShell, I haven't done this before. Let's say let's say I'm going to create a new AD user object. And I think to myself, I work through the command line switches for this thing. I write the whole thing out. I don't want to just hit enter and get it done. I want to grab it and save it. So the next time that I have to call this commandlet, it's a simple matter of editing the text file, and there you go. I'm good to go, right? I just copy and paste, run it again, or I can even save this Notepad document as a PowerShell script, edit the script anytime I want, and run the script. Notepad is your best friend. It's my best friend, and I literally use it every day. It comes in so handy. Down here on the taskbar, I also have File Explorer. And File Explorer, everybody knows it, I would assume, right? We know that it's how we get around in here in the GUI, right? There's my disks. I can move from disk to disk and see what's on each disk and access the files that are on there. And I can see, actually, if I select the C disk, I can see that this machine is a SQL server, it's an Exchange server, right? It does a lot of things for me. And when I think about this from the perspective of systems management, well, here's my log files. What's happened on this machine that I need to know about? Well, it's probably right there in the log files. The Windows installation directory is here. I use this as a distribution point for software installations, right? All the setup files that are required for the software that I'm going to push out are in the distribution point. It's a DFS root for distributed file system, right? For file replication services. And so I can replicate data from here. And then the last thing that we want to touch on is Windows updates, which I've opened Windows update settings already, but you could get to this from the start menu, type Windows Update, you'll get Windows Update settings. Now, this should be on for everybody. You want automated updates all the time. And there's better ways to do it than in here, but this is local on the machine, and it'll be local on every Windows machine everywhere. And the beauty of this tool now, if I choose Update History, there's a choice right there to uninstall the update. So at the time of this recording, it just so happens this week was Super Patch Tuesday. And so, right, the second Tuesday of every month, Microsoft releases its updates. And some geeks call that Super Patch Tuesday. And these updates were just installed for me. And it happened all quite automatically. Well, why? Well, because updates are on. And if I look here, here's active hours. Active hours tells the machine that I'm working here from 8 to 5. If my schedule were to change, I could change those hours in here. And then it won't forcibly restart to finish updates during that time. Here's restart options. we'll restart to finish installing updates when you tell us to. Okay, that's a good idea. And in this example, I don't have the option to do that because there's a group policy setting that comes down from the domain level that impacts this here. But on a standalone machine, certainly you'd be able to make that choice. And then in advanced options, because this machine is also an Exchange server and a SQL server and other things, I can choose to give me updates for other Microsoft products when I update Windows. So I get those critical security updates for Exchange and SQL, as well as for the Windows interface here. This is a look at some of the GUI tools for systems management and why I'm interested in them. In this video, we want to take a look at the Services MSC and regedit. Now, and I've accessed regedit just by launching the Start menu, typing regedit, and there it is, right? And I can go ahead and launch it. And it opens up to the last place I was, right? I had been drilled down in there. And so if I collapse that from the navigation bar on the left, you can see what's here. We start at the top with HKey classes root, HKey current user, HKey local machine, HKey users, and HKey current config. Now, these H keys are what we call hives, registry hives. And where you spend most of your time in here is in HKey local machine. It's machine registry settings that we tend to have to go in and tweak. Tend to, right? Now, it's true there are other keys in here that you might have to go in and edit. You might have to go in and change, but not commonly. And there's a good reason for that, right? Things like the current config. Well, the current config is exactly that, the current config. And that registry hive is rebuilt dynamically, as is HKey local machine. Every time I reboot this machine, because I could reboot the machine, I could shut the machine down, I could add a piece of hardware, I could install new memory, I could install new hard disks, whatever it happens to be. And when the machine reboots, it's going to detect those and it's going to build its current config. And so that's a volatile hive. That is to say that it changes regularly and in a quite automated fashion. I don't know in 30 years in this business if I ever changed the current config, honestly, or the HKey class's root for that matter. Now, HKey users, if we open this up, I see these in here and they don't tell me very much. They don't give me very much information because this is where hidden, you can't even see it here, is the SAM file database. That's the Security Accounts Manager database, the database of local users and groups on this machine. And I don't even have access to that. Then you've got HKey current user and HKey local machine, and this, my friends, is where all the action is at. For anybody that's spent any time with group policy, HKey current user maps to the user portion of group policy, while HKey local machine maps to the machine portion of group policy. So when I change a group policy setting that affects the local machine, well, this is where it's going to make its change. Now, I come in here and I see a couple of things, right? Now, you may be saying to yourself, well, Murph, wait a minute. There's the SAM folder, right? You just told me this thing was hidden and it's not even in this hive. Well, it is and it isn't. Now, first of all, you'll notice there's nothing I can do here. But in point of fact, these are pointers to what's actually stored securely, safely, in a hashed fashion over here in HKey users. Now, coming on back in here, we see that there's some other registry keys in the tree. Security, software, system. And under system, there's a current control set. And the current control set is exactly that, right? These are the current settings, configurations for things like services running on this machine. And if I scroll down through the list, look at all the services on this one single machine. And this is very common, right? We don't tend to come in here unless we've got a good reason. And so, for example, if I come down here to DNS parameters, here's a look at particular settings for the DNS service. This machine happens to be a DNS server. And there are keys in here that control certain settings. Now, some of these keys, if you're following along on your own DNS server, you don't see. And you don't see them because you've added these keys, or you have not yet added these keys. So, for example, I can right-click anywhere in here, say New Key, and then I can specify the data type, right? Is it a string, right, just a text string? Is it a binary value? Yes, no. Is it a D word, right, 32-bit or 64-bit? Multi-string value, etc. Now, if you take a look with me, there's something called the socket pool size, and I can display that value as either hexadecimal or decimal value. And I have the socket pool size set to 2500. And that's a setting that I enforced for my own reasons. It makes my machine more secure. I followed the Microsoft best practice guidance for this, and I configured this in this way following that guidance. The socket pool excluded port range. What ports do I not use for DNS? Right? I can specify that in there. Again, added the key following the Microsoft best practice recommendations. Now, ladies and gentlemen, with all due respect, it is not advisable to come in here and muck around too much. What you want to do is when there's guidance, good guidance, particularly security guidance, like to enable cache locking and set a percentage for it for your DNS server, you follow the tree, you follow the guidance, you add the key, you give it the value they tell you, and you save your changes, and you walk away. And for most of us, that's what we want to understand about this. I don't go in here writing my own registry keys, commonly, right? Like some folks do. Those folks are few and far between that know what they're doing in my experience. Because you do this wrong, and you're going to have problems. You follow the guidance, you'll be more secure, things will work. This is a look at regedit. In this exercise, you will use CD, the change directory command, to navigate the program files directory and list the contents. Use ipconfig to determine if your IP address is static or DHCP assigned. Use checkdisk to determine disk integrity. And use regedit to navigate to HKey local machine system current control set services in the registry tree. So I'm going to ask you to do a number of things here. The first is use the change directory command to first get to the program files directory, right? And then list the contents. ipconfig, take a look at that. trickier than you might think. And then the others should be fairly straightforward. So go ahead, pause the video, and when you've completed these tasks, come on back and we'll go through them together. Ready? Go ahead and pause the video now. Get everything? All right, let's take a look at it together. Now, the first thing I'm going to do is launch an occurrence of the command prompt, and I'm actually going to start check disk running. And because that's going to take a few minutes to run, so we'll let it run while we do the other things. Then I'll open another occurrence of the command prompt. And that's all from the taskbar, only because I've pinned the command prompt taskbar or icon to the taskbar, right? It's not there by default, but because I'm in there all the time, I pin it there, and then it's always available to me. Now, the first thing we were asked to do was to navigate to the program files directory and list its contents. So that's an easy thing to do if I know where it is, but maybe I don't. So the very first thing that I want to do is move back up to the root of C. And so I can do that with a change directory whack dot. Now I'm back here at C, and a directory command, dir command, gives me the list of the folders on the C drive. And I can see the program files directory is there. We were not specific in the request for x86 or program files, so I'm just going to go to program files, and I can do that with the change directory. And because there's a space in program files, I'm going to enclose the whole thing in quotes to take me to the program files directory. And now I'm in program files, I can do a dir, and we're there, right? There's the list. Now, I want to point out to you that a correct response to this would also have been to use chdr with no quotes, because of course that's the purpose of chdr, right? And there we're back to program files again, and again I can call the directory command and list what's in there. Now, ipconfig to determine whether the IP address is statically assigned or not. And you might have been thinking when I first asked that, well, gosh, that's a silly, easy thing to do, right? If I just do ipconfig, there's my IP address, right? I see all my IP addresses, but I don't know whether they're DHCP or statically assigned. What must I do to determine that? Well, I've got to do ipconfig all. Boom. Now I'm told which of these is DHCP assigned and which of these are not, right? If there's a DHCP server listed, if there's a DHCP yes